Hello and welcome back. My name is Musa Peter and welcome to this Python tutorial. So in this video, we are going to explore tuples in Python, which is a simple but yet powerful data structure that is used to store fixed and unchangeable data. So you learn how to create tuples, access their values, and understand when to use them instead of lists. So let's dive in. So previously we had actually gone through lists, which was our first data structure. And in case you didn't go through that, you can watch the video that precedes this. So for this session, we are going to be majorly discussing about tuples. And tuples are actually immutable. We always say that tuples are usually immutable, or even we can say that they are unchangeable. So these are the key terms that are used to describe tuples. They are usually immutable and also unchangeable. So think of it as a sealed envelope. Think of it as a sealed envelope. So whenever you seal an envelope, someone can read what is inside, or even they can actually unseal it and read whatever is inside, but they cannot change the information. Assume you have an envelope that contains a letter inside, and this letter was written by maybe your friend, maybe your family members, or even anyone, and then they send it to you. In this case, that envelope would contain information. So you can actually see whatever is inside, but you cannot change whatever is inside. You cannot modify it. So that is what we call a tuple. So once a tuple is created, you cannot change it or even modify it. You cannot change it. That is the key difference between a tuple and a list. We say that a list is always mutable. You can change whatever is inside a list. You can modify it. You can even alter it. But for a tuple, you cannot change anything within it. Once created, it cannot be changed. Okay. So tuples are immutable. These are the key characteristics of tuples. These are the key characteristics. The first one is that tuples contain ordered items. So the items are usually in an ordered manner. So the way they have been put, they always remain the same. So items stay in the same order that you had put them. So if you had maybe a tuple containing different fruits, like watermelons, guavas, maybe passions, and very many others. So in that case, the order in which you store them, the order in which you put them, is the same order that is usually maintained. So for tuples, they maintain their order. And then the second one is that they are usually immutable. Tuples are usually immutable. That means that they cannot be changed after creation. So we cannot add, we cannot remove, or even modify a tuple. And then they also allow duplicates. Just like lists, tuples allow duplicates. They allow us to duplicate items. So you can have maybe a specific item duplicated within that tuple. And then they also allow us to use different types of data. Like you can have a tuple containing maybe strings, a tuple containing maybe a Boolean, maybe containing digits, and also maybe floats. So you can have all the data types within a tuple. Actually, Python allows us to do that. And then it also contains items that are usually indexed. Python starts counting values from 0. So the first index is always 0. So each item has a position number. Each item has a position number. So if you had different items like item 1, item 2, item 3. So for these items, their indexes would be from 0 in this case. You'll be having indexes from 0, and then index 1, and then index 2. So that is what Python does. So it recognizes the different indexes the different indices for each item in this case. So this is before that, tuples are usually faster than lists. They are usually faster than lists. So when working around using tuples, you get better results or even better performance compared to lists, because you might have a very long list in this case. So in terms of performance, tuples are actually, they give us a slightly better performance compared to a list. And that is why most of the people prefer using tuples. This is a general syntax. This is a general syntax for a tuple. That is a general syntax for a tuple. So what you do is that you basically write the tuple name. This is the tuple name, and then is equals to, and then we have the items within that tuple. So we have maybe mangoes, we have guavas, and we also have pineapples. So the items in this case represent what is to be contained within your tuple. And then the other key difference between a tuple and a list is that for tuples, we use parentheses. We use parentheses, the C-shaped brackets. And then for list, we say that we use a square brackets. We use square brackets. So tuples use parentheses. Tuples use parentheses. This is very, very important. They use parentheses. Okay. So when do we use tuples? When do we use tuples? Number one, you can think of it as think of it as maybe you're working in a company whereby you are dealing with critical data. Maybe this is data that contains coordinates, data that contains coordinates, dates of a specific month, or maybe dates containing that is the day, the month, and the year, and then the configuration. And you'd not want people to change that information, because this is actually sensitive data, like the day when a specific employee was hired, maybe the day when a specific worker was promoted. That is sensitive information. And apart from that, employees data, that is the name, the age, and also the gender. This is data that should not be changed. So anytime you're working with data that is very delicate, so what you do is that you use a tuple. You use a tuple. So most of the times we use tuples when we have data that should not change, data that is very delicate, data that is very sensitive, data that should not be modified in that case. So tuples are a better option in that case compared to list. And then when we want to protect data from accidental modification, then we also use a list. We use a tuple, sorry. We use a tuple. So if you want to protect your data from accidental modification, then you use a tuple. Because in this case, once a tuple is created, it cannot be changed. It is usually immutable. And then tuples, we've said that they offer a slightly better performance compared to lists. They offer a better performance compared to lists. So if you want to maybe have a better performance, then you use a tuple. Now we have four different ways of creating tuples. We have four different ways of creating tuples. So the first one is to create your tuple, maybe tuple one in this case, and then have the values enclosed within the parentheses, within these parentheses. So this is a tuple that has multiple items. And then we can also omit the brackets, that is the parentheses, and just list our items as one, separated by commas. The items within a tuple are usually separated by commas. That is the main point. So if I want to get the output for tuple one, I'll run that, and you can see what I have. You can see what I'm having here. So Python recognizes that as a tuple. Now for tuple 2, which didn't have the parentheses, let us see whether Python is going to recognize that as a tuple. And you can see the output is a tuple. In this case, Python recognizes this as a tuple. Even though there are no parentheses, the values or even the items were separated by a comma. That is why Python recognizes that as a tuple. And then the third one is a list. The third one is a list. And in this case, the list is being converted into a tuple. We are converting that list into a tuple. Remember, we said that lists use square brackets. So we have our list within the square brackets and the value separated by commas. And then we enclose that within parentheses. And then we use the keyword tuple. We use that word tuple. That tells Python to change this list into a tuple. That is what it means. So we are basically telling Python, change that list into a tuple. Let us run that. So after running that, you can see that Python has actually converted our list, which was 1, 2, 3, into a tuple. And the output contains parentheses. And then the last one is when you have a single item tuple. A single item tuple. This is actually a tuple that contains only one item. So what you do is that, remember we said that for a tuple you have to use commas between the items, the different items. So if you have this is a string, that is why it is enclosed in double quotation marks. We say that for strings, you have to enclose them within single or double quotation marks. So this is a tuple that contains only apples, and there are no any other values. So what we do is that we write the item and then a comma, then enclose the tuple. If you omit the comma, then Python would not recognize that as a tuple. It would just recognize that as a string. So let us run or even print out the output for the fourth one, and you can see what we have here. So Python recognized that as a tuple, and that is why after running that, we can see that we are having apples, then a comma. That is being recognized as a tuple. And later on, we are going to discuss on now the immutability of tuples and see whether we can be able to modify items within a tuple. Now, more examples. So a single element tuple must have a comma. That is the keyword in this case. If you are having a single element tuple, then it must have a comma. It must have a comma. Okay, for example, so the first one is not a tuple. That is the name of our tuple, not a tuple. Contains apples and there is no comma. So Python would not recognize this as a tuple. Okay, let me run that. So let us call out the first tuple, not a tuple. Let us call out that. You can see what we are having here. Python does not recognize that as a tuple, and that is why it does not enclose the output within the parentheses. The output is not enclosed within parentheses. And then the second one was a real tuple. So there was a comma after the item. There was a comma after the item. So if we run that, you can see that Python recognizes this as a tuple, and that is why it encloses that within parentheses. So for any single element tuple, you must separate the element using a comma, or even for a tuple, the elements must be separated using a comma. Now, assume that you have data that is supposed to contain coordinates in this case, the x and the y coordinates, whereby 10 represents the x coordinate and y represents the y coordinate in this case. So let us run that. Let us run that. So in this case, Python recognizes this as a tuple. That is why the final output is coordinates, and then the values enclosed within parentheses. You can also have a tuple that contains the person's name, their age, and also their title. This is sensitive data. This is sensitive data that is not supposed to be changed, or even maybe employees' data. So we print out the person's, we print out the values or even the items contained within the person's tuple. So what we do, remember I said that this is just additional information. This is just additional information. Otherwise, we can just print person, the word person alone. So we print person, and once we call out person, it is going to output this tuple, or even the items within that tuple. Okay. So you can see person contains John. Then we have the age 25, and then their title is an engineer. Now for strings, we say that we can use double quotations or single quotation marks. So for this case, we used single quotation marks. Then we have a single element tuple, which must have a comma. It must have a comma. It must have a comma. A single element tuple must have a comma. That is very, very important. It must have a comma. Otherwise, if it doesn't have a comma, then it would not be recognized as a tuple. It would be recognized as a string, or even as a float, if it was a float, or maybe digits, numbers, that is. So our value here is 42, then followed by a comma. And then let us print out single element tuple, and then we call out our tuple, in that case, the tuple name. And you can see what we are having here. So the single element tuple is equals to 42, and then a comma. Now, if we didn't use a comma here, let me change this. Let me remove the comma. I've removed the comma and run that again. So you can see that Python does not recognize that as a tuple. Instead, it is being recognized as just a normal number, not a tuple. So that is a difference. So for a single element tuple, you have to use a comma. Otherwise, you are going to get zeros, or even you're going to get, not zeros, but wrong results. Now, if you have your tuple without a comma, just like I did before, it will just be a number in parentheses. Python will recognize that as a number without, in parentheses. So our tuple name is not a tuple, which is equals to 42. In this case, this is just a normal number, not a tuple. So we print not a tuple. This is just additional information, just like I said. Then our tuple name was not a tuple. And then we add some more information here, and then type not a tuple. So for this case, we've used another keyword, which is type. Type will give the type, it gives the data type, whether it is an integer, whether it is a float, whether it is maybe a Boolean, whether it is a string. So it gives the data type. So for this case, not a tuple 42 is it is in the integer class. So the data type in that case is integer, not a tuple. Now, if we do the same for this, for example, let me do something else here. Let me add something here. Let me print. Okay, let me print out type, and for the single, I want type for the single. Remember our tuple name was single, this above here. So let us call out the type. What type is it? And you can see Python returns a tuple. So that one is a tuple. So the single in this case is a tuple. This is a tuple. And then the other one was an integer. So that is a difference. That is a difference between a single tuple with a comma and a single item tuple without a comma. So how do we access tuple items? How do we access tuple items? So we can actually access tuple items using indexing and slicing. So we can use indexing and slicing in that case. So for example, if we have a person's tuple having the name of the person, the age, the title, and the town or even the country where they come from. So we can access these values by their index. Remember, this is index 1. This is index 0, sorry. Then this is index 1. Then we have index 2. And then this is index 3. So once we call out index 0 from this specific tuple, it's going to return John. Once we call out index 1, it's going to return 25. And that is what we do. So remember, we have positive indexing and we also have negative indexing, of which we are going to dig deep into that. So we want to print the item within the first index 0. So what we do, we basically write the name of the tuple, and then we enclose the index using square brackets. Remember what we were doing with the list? We used square brackets for the index, square brackets for the index. So we want the first value here. So that will be index 0. And let us run that. So you can see the final output is John. The final output is John. And then we can also print out the value within index 1, the value within index 1, and the value within index 1 is 25. That is the age. So we can also use what we call negative indexing. Negative indexing. This is whereby negative indexing means that the last item here would be regarded as -1, then -2, then -3 for 25, and -4. So the last item is always given a -1 index. So negative indexing means we start from the last to the first. In that case, we start from the last to the first. So in this case, we call out the tuple name and then -1. That will give us the last index. So after running that, you can see that the last value is, or even the last item is New York. We can also do the same. maybe if we change this to -4, if we change this to -4, if we change -1 to -4, that should give us the first item. Give us the first item. So let me change this to -4. Let me change that to -4 and see what you are going to have. So you can see that the last item, not the last item actually, but the first item. Let me also change this. The first item. The first item, which is now index -4, is John. So that is what we mean when we talk about negative indexing. So negative indexing means that we are counting from the back. We are counting from the back. So this becomes -1, -1. Then we have -2, then -3, -4, in that manner, Okay. So that is what we call indexing. Then we can also slice. Assume we want a portion of a tuple. We do not want to work with all the values within the tuple. We can also slice that tuple. That means that we can get values from, maybe assume I wanted the first two elements of that tuple, the first two items of that tuple. I can access them using their indexes. This is index 1 and this is index 0, sorry, and this is index 1. So we can actually slice them. We can slice them. So what we do is that we write the name of the tuple, which is person, and then the indexes. So this means that we want the values from index 0 all the way to index 2. So that would give us the first three, it would give us the first two items. It would give us the first two items, index 0 to index 2. Remember, we said that the last index is never included. The last index is never included. So the 2 here will not be included during slices, during slicing. So you can see that the output is John and 25. John and 25. That is the name and the age. Now, assume we have another tuple that contains numbers from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And for that, we want the middle number. We want maybe, okay. We want the numbers from 1 to 4. That is from index 1 to 4. So in this case, this is another tuple. So that this tuple is equals to the numbers tuple, and then from index 1 to 4. So in this case, we are slicing elements from index 1 to 3. That is what it means. Remember, the last index is not included, which is 4. So we want items from index 1 to 3. So that would output what? Let us see the output. Let me add another one here. So let me call out the middle. I'm just going to call out the middle, and you can see what we have here. So if we call out the middle, that is, if we call out this specific tuple called middle, it's going to give you 2, 3, and 4. That is index 1, index 2, and index 3. Index 4 will not be included. And then we have a reversed tuple. So for a reversed tuple, it's the numbers from the start to the end. But now we are going to rearrange them from -1. We are going to rearrange them from -1. This means from the first to the last. Whenever you have this, it means from the first to the last. So we rearrange them from -1 in this case. We are reversing that tuple. So let us run that. After running that, you can see that our tuple has already been created. So let me call it out. Reversed tuple. And now you can see what we have. So if we call the reversed tuple out, what we have here is the output 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it has been reversed. So anytime you want to reverse a tuple, or even the order in this case, then you use this format. You use this format. You use this format. I can also do the same for the middle tuple, and it will actually give me the same values, but now in a reversed order. Now we see that tuples cannot change. So that means that tuples are usually immutable. They are usually immutable. They can never change once they have been created. Tuples do not change once they have been created. We cannot change their order. The only thing that we can do is reversing, like what we did here was reversing, but we cannot change the order in which the values have been, or even the items were actually assigned. So this is the key difference between lists and tuples. Once created, tuples are usually frozen. They're usually frozen. They cannot be changed. Now, let us demonstrate something here. So we are going to work with this specific tuple, the one that we created earlier, that is coordinates. So our tuple contains these two coordinates for the x and y, 10, 20. And then we are also going to work out using the same value. So let me before I run this, the second one, let me take you to this. So in this case, we want to change the item in index 0. The item in index 0. Remember, the item in index 0 here was 10. So we want to change it to 15. So if we try changing this to 15, that is 10 to 15, that one will fail. It will fail. It will actually fail. So if we want to change this, the item in index 0 to 15, this will fail. So what we are going to do, I've just added some additional information in this case. So once it returns an error, then print out, you cannot change a tuple after creation. So if it returns a type error, in this case, then print out this. And the tuple remains unchanged in that case. Okay. So you can see what we are having here. So once you try changing the values within that tuple, what you get is an error. So since we are getting an error, we print out tuple object does not support. We print you cannot change a tuple after creation. So this is what you get. So this is the error that we were getting. The error, the tuple object does not support item assignment. That is the error that we are getting. So since we are getting an error, what we do is that we print out you cannot change a tuple after creation. That is what mostly happens. That is what mostly happens. And I know most of you have come across such. Sometimes you try maybe modifying the values within a specific website, and then you receive an error message. You cannot change that specific item. You cannot do this. That is what happens most of the times. And then, so what happens is that the tuple remains unchanged. So if we print out the specific tuple name, which was now coordinates, you will still get this. You still get the original values, that is 10, 20. You still get the original values, which is 10, 20. And that is what happens. So you can never change the values within a tuple. Okay. This is a bit simpler. So if we have the data tuple, which contains values 1, 2, and 3, and then we try to change, this is how we change the values within a tuple. So we have the tuple name, we have the tuple name, and then the index, followed by the index. And I said that the indexes must be within square brackets. So if we are changing the value in the 0 index to 100, then this will raise an error. So if we run that, it will actually raise an error. You can see what we are getting. These are type, you can see that it's a type error. In this case, type error. We are trying to change the object within a tuple. Tuple object does not support item assignment. In that case, tuples do not support item assignment or even changing. So we are trying to modify that specific tuple, which raises an error. So that is what happens. And that is what I was just speaking about. So tuples are immutable. We can never modify them. Now, modifying a mutable item inside a tuple. Now, if you have an item that is mutable means that it can be changed. In this case, you can have a tuple that contains a list within it. For example, we have this. This is a mixed tuple. So it contains 1, which is now the first value. And then the second value is a list. That is a list that contains 2, 3. So for this one, this is a list. So we can change the values within that list, but we cannot modify the tuple itself. We cannot change the values within the tuple itself. but we can modify the values within the list because lists are usually mutable. So let me run that. And then in this case, we want to modify the list inside the tuple. We want to modify the list inside the tuple. So we can call out by its index. So in this case, we want to change the values within index 1. Remember, for this specific tuple, this is index 0, and then the list that is index 1. So 1 is index 0, and then for the list that is index 1. So we want to change the value within index 1, which is now the list, and then index 0 for that list. So we are going to modify 2 to 99. We are going to modify 2 to 99. We are going to modify 2 to 99 in that case. That is what it means. So we can use these different indexes consecutively in that case, and that would actually help us in modifying. The values if you had a list within a tuple. Okay, so once we run that, that one has run successfully. So we can call it out to see what we have now. And you can see our new tuple contains 1, we have 99, and 3. So this value here was changed. That value there was changed. What is the index of that value? It is 1. It is index 1 for the entire list, and the 0 for the first value of the list. So the first value of the list is 1. It is 0, sorry. And the second value of the list is index 1. So in this case, we are interested in index 0, which is 2 for the list. And that is what happens. So we can modify a mutable item inside a tuple, but we cannot change the values within that tuple themselves. Now, we proceed to tuple concatenation and repetition. We can concatenate values within a tuple. So assume we have a variable A, or even a tuple A, which contains 1, 2, and we have a variable B, or even a tuple B, which contains 3, 4. That is the second tuple. So we can combine A and B. We can join two tuples. So what we do is that we just write A plus B, and that would give us the new combined tuple. Okay, so let me call it out, combined, and let us see what we have. So for the combined tuple, you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've concatenated, or even we have joined that tuple together, the two tuples together, tuple A and B. We've joined them together. And then we can repeat a specific tuple a multiple number of times. For example, in this case, repeated tuple is equals to tuple A repeated 3 times. So A multiplied by 3 means it's A, tuple A repeated 3 times, or even 3 number of times. So let us run that. And it's already run successfully. So let me call it out. Let me call it out, and you can see what we have. So we've repeated tuple A 3 number of times. So this is the first time, this is the second time, and this is the third time. That is the third time. So that is our now repeated tuple. We can also do something else. Let me try using the two techniques, concatenation and repetition. So let me call it mixed. So mixed tuple is equals to, so I'm going to have A plus B, A plus B, and then A plus B, and then multiplied by 2. Okay, that one has already been created. Let me call it out. Mixed. So it was A plus B raised to power, or even multiplied by 2. So that means our B was 3, 4. So B is being repeated 2 times. That is why you are having this. B repeated 2 times. And then you join that to the values of A. That is tuple concatenation and repetition. So we can actually join 2 tuples together. We can also repeat the values or even the items within a tuple a multiple number of times. And that allows us to maybe make work easier. Now, membership testing. This is whereby we test whether a specific number is found within a tuple. For example, in this case, we have all these values. So assume we wanted to test whether 3 is found within that tuple. What will we do? So the first thing, we define our tuple. We define our tuple. So these are our tuple numbers, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we come up with a second tuple, which is called exists. So we use the in keyword. We use the in keyword. So we want to check whether 2 is in numbers. 2 in numbers. That is what we use. 2 in numbers. So is 2 in numbers? If it's in numbers, so it checks whether 2 exists within that specific tuple. It checks whether 2 is in that specific tuple. That is what happens. So you can see, if you run the exists, you can see it returns a true. That means that 2 is in that specific tuple. Now, if I changed this to 5, you can see that what we have here is 1, 2, 3, 4. So there is no 5. So let us check whether 5 is in that specific tuple, which is called numbers. Let us check that and then call it out. Let us call it out. Exists. You can see it returns a false. It returns a false. That means that 5 is not in that specific tuple. That is membership testing. So if you want to know that a specific number or even a specific item is contained within a specific tuple, then you use the in keyword. You use the in keyword, this one. Okay, let us test. Let us do some other tests. Let us test. Let me have animal. Animal is equals to, and then for the animal, we are going to use these quotation marks. So lion, going to have lion in numbers. Let me check whether lion is in numbers and then print out animal. So you can see once we test that, the word lion is not in numbers. It is not in our numbers tuple. And that is why it returns a false. The word lion is not in that tuple. It returns a false. So if you want to test, then you use the in keyword. And I believe that makes sense. Now, the next one is tuple unpacking. Tuple unpacking. This is a very, very useful feature. So you can unpack a tuple into separate variables in one line. You can unpack them. Now, what unpacking means is that you can now regard the first value in this case. This was our coordinate tuple. So this represented the x and this represented the y. So we can now unpack them so that we have the x and we have the y. So remember, our tuple has 2 values. So in this case, you're going to also have 2 values. So x, comma, y is equals to coordinates. So we are unpacking them such that the first value would be regarded as the x and the second value would be regarded as the y. So we print out this value, x is equals to, the value of x is equals to this, and the value of y is equals to this value here. Now, in this case, you can see that we are using curly brackets. Now, majorly, we use the curly brackets whenever we have this. Majorly, we use the curly brackets whenever we have this. We are going to discuss about that as we proceed. But for now, you just need to know that we use the curly brackets whenever we have this. Or even whenever the values, we are calling out the values, this tuple, this specific tuple here, within these brackets. That is when we use the curly brackets. So let us print them. And you can see we've already unpacked our tuples. So the x is equals to 10 and y is equals to 20. Now, another example, which will make it a bit easier. So we have a person's tuple, and this contains the name Alice, the age, and the profession. So now we are going to come up with these variables representing each value here. So the name is Alice, the age is 30, and the job is data scientist. So these 3 values are now represented within the person's tuple. So let us print the name. The age, and their job, and see what happens. So you can see name is equals to Alice, age is equals to 30, and job is equals to data scientist. Just I said that we use these curly brackets, whenever you are using, you're calling out them, you're calling out the tuple name within the within these two quotation marks. That is double quotation marks. And then the last one, so we have a person and their name is Ali, their age is 25, and their country is Kenya. Their country is Kenya. So we do the same. So the name, age, and the country is equals to person. So the number of values within this part, the number of values in this case must be equivalent to what is contained within your tuple. So these ones they are found within the person's tuple, and then we call out these values, the name, the age, and the country. And you'll be able to see the name, the age, and the country. That is what we call tuple and unpacking. Then we have swapping values using tuples. We can actually swap values using tuples. And this is usually very, very simple. So if A is equals to 5 and B is equals to 10, then we can print A before, I mean, we can print out before swapping, we can print out their values. So in this case, we are going to print out the value of A and the value of B. This is actually the same as printing out A and B. It is just the same. This is the same as printing A and B. So for this case, okay, let me use print. So print A. If you use print A, you're going to get the value of A is 5. You can also print the same B, you're going to get the same value. So in this case, we are interested in the values of A and B before swapping, which was A was 5 and B was 10. So now, if we swap them, then what we do is that we write A, comma B is equals to B, comma A. So the value of AB should be equivalent to the value of BA. So we've swapped them. So if the first value started with A, the second value is going to begin with B. That is how we swap them. And then we print the values. So after swapping, A is equals to 10 and B is equals to 5. So like we've swapped their values. We've swapped their values. We've swapped their values. That is what happens. So if you look at that, we've already swapped their values. So the value of A becomes 10. Initially it was 5. Value of B is 5. Initially it was 10. So the values have actually been swapped. Now, assume we also have A, comma B is equals to 10, 20. We can do the same. So AB is equals to BA. That means that we are swapping the values using tuple unpacking. So we are actually unpacking them first, and then we swap them. And then we print them after swap. So A is equals to this value of A, but now in curly brackets, and then B is equals to B in curly brackets. And then we run that. After running that, you can see that the value of A, which was initially 10, becomes 20, and B becomes 10. And that is what we mean by swapping values using tuples. We can also use this specific operator, the multiply by operator in unpacking, this one. So this operator is very, very important. We can also use it in unpacking. So assume we have our first tuple, which is numbers, and it contains numbers from 1 to 5. So we can actually divide this into two sections. We can divide it into two sections. So we are going to have the first, comma, and then the rest. So this means that we are dividing them into two sections, the first value and the rest of the values. For example, in this case, we have first, and then the rest. So for the rest of the numbers, we are going to use this specific operator, the multiply by operator. This means that from 2 to 5, that is a group. So it will be regarded as now a different part. We are going to unpack it as a group, and then 1 is going to be alone. So let us print out first and see what is going to happen. So if you print out first, it's going to give you only one value, and then rest, it's going to give you the rest of the values. So for example, in this case, if we print rest, you can see we have 2, 3, 4, 5 in that case. So first and the rest, they are now found within numbers. So we are unpacking them. So what happens is that Python stores the first value separately, and the rest is also stored separately. We can also unpack it in the middle. In this case, we can unpack it in the middle such that we have the first and then the middle numbers and the last. So what happens in this case? We unpack first the first value, which is 10, the last value, which is 50, and these ones will be regarded as a group. The ones in the middle would be regarded as a group. The ones in the middle would be regarded as a group. So these three would be regarded as a group. So this is very, very important when you're doing unpacking. So let us print out first. Let us print out the first. So the first value is 10. Let us print out the middle. And the middle values, they are 20, 30, and 40, the three. And then the last value was 50. So that it depends with where you place this specific operator, which is now the multiply by operator. Now let me copy this. Let me copy this and just do it the same way. Let me copy that and change something. I'm going to change something here. So I'm going to remove this operator and put it here on first. I'm going to change that. So what this means that Python is going to regard the first values and then the middle value and the last. So we are going to have the first values, then middle, and the last. So once we print out the first, you're going to have the three, these three appearing as the first values. And then the middle value is now going to be this, and then the last value is going to be 50. So like it depends with what you use. Now for these ones, these words are not, they're actually not like keywords. We can change them. I can have maybe fast mangoes. I can have fast mangoes. Something, I can just change them. First mangoes, middle mango, and maybe last mango. In this case, it is not middle, it is second last. Second last. Second last. And then I can print out first mangoes. And if we print out first mangoes, you are still going to get the same. So these ones are not keywords. They are just words that I use to unpack my tuple. Now, assume you have this specific tuple again, and you want to use it at the beginning, just like I did here. We can use it at the beginning. So we are going to have the first numbers, that is the start, and the last number. So Python is going to break this into two, the first numbers and the last number, which is 20. So if we print the start, we are going to get the first three numbers, which is 5, 10, and 15. If we print the last, it's going to give us the last number, which is 20. That is what happens. And then we have looping in tuples, And for this, we use what we call a for loop, So assume you have items, like a pen, a book, and a bag. That is now our tuple, which contains those items. So we can do something for each item. So the for loop has this specific syntax. So you have to begin with for, and then the item. For item, the item in this case is pen, book, and bag. So for item in, then the name of the tuple. So the for item in items, print item. So in this case, Python is going to print each item. It is going to print each item. So you can see what is happening. So Python has printed each item. So for each item in this, I can also change this to for maybe maybe I don't know what the best word for me to call them, but I would have called them stationary. But let me write shoppies. For shoppies in items, print shoppies. In this case, it is things that we are going to be buying them. And you can see, so we can change this. We can actually alter that, but we can't alter the name of the tuple. So for shoppies in items, print shoppies. And Python is going to unpack them into each item. Then the last one is tuple methods. And tuples have only two methods because they cannot be changed. So we can count, we can use the count and then followed by the name of the item. And this counts the occurrences of an item. It counts how many times that item is appearing within that tuple. And then we have the index, then followed by the item. This one finds the index of an item. It finds the index of an item. So those are the two methods that we can use when dealing with tuples. So for example, if we have numbers, that is from 1, 2, 3, 2, 4, 2, 5. We can count how many times 2 appears using the count option. So we write the name of the tuple, the name of the tuple, which is numbers, then followed by count. And then what are we counting? We are counting the number of times when 2 is appearing, and then run that. So if we run that, you are going to get 3. So the output is 3. That means that 2 is appearing 3 times. And I believe you can see that we have these 2, we also have this, and we also have that. So 2 is appearing 3 times. We can also find the index of 4. What is the index of this 4? Now, if we do it basically, this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the index of 4 is 4. But we can use the index option. So what we do is that we write the name of the tuple, followed by index, then followed by the value that we are looking for. Which item are we looking for its index? It's 4. And then we run that, which will be 4. We can also find the first index of 2. What is the first index of 2? So we do the same. So numbers followed by index, then the number that we are looking its index, which is 2. And this would give us 1. So this is 0. The first value here is index 0. And then our first appearance of 2 is at index 1. And that is where you are having this 1. Okay, assume you have the second tuple, which is now values being 1, 2, 2, 3. We can count twos. We can count twos in this case. That means that we are going to be counting the occurrences of 2. We are going to count the occurrences of 2. So we use our tuple. So count twos is equals to values dot, that is the values in this case is the name of our tuple. So values dot count, and then what we are counting. What are we counting? We are counting twos. We are counting twos. So, and then we print out the values. We print out values dot count, the count of 2. And what do we get? So we get 2 in this case. Now, before that, let me add something here. Count twos. Print. Okay. So in this case, if we print count twos, remember it's actually counting the number of times 2 is appearing. So 2 is appearing 2 times. 2 is appearing 2 times. That is why we are getting 2. That is why we are getting 2. So if we print the count of 2, the count of 2 would be now the values, and then we count the word 2. That is from the values, we count this specific item, which is 2, and it's going to give you 2. So 2 is appearing 2 times. The letter, the digit 2 is appearing 2 times, or even the integer 2 is appearing 2 times. Now, we can also find the index of 3. We can find the index of 3. So it will be index 3, which is equals to values, that is the name of the tuple, and then dot index, and then the item that we want to find its index. The item that we want to find its index. And in this case, it would be 3. So the index of 3 is 3. Let us ascertain that. So this is index 0, index 1, index 2, and then index 3. So 3 is in index 3. 3 is in index 3. And that is what happens. Okay. So that is it about tuple methods. So we can count the number of times a specific value is appearing within the tuple, and we can also find the index of a specific tuple. We can find the index of a specific, item within a tuple. the index. Nested tuples. So nested tuples, these are tuples within another tuple, a tuple within another tuple. For example, this is our tuple called matrix. So the matrix contains the first tuple and the second tuple. So let us print that. So if you print that, you're going to get two tuples within an outer tuple. So it's one tuple that contains two tuples. That is what we call a nested tuple. So how do we access nested tuple elements? We use their indexes or even their indices. So assume I want to get the value, I want to get another tuple that is called the value. In this case, I want to access the first value of the second tuple. I want to access the first value of the second tuple. So I will use my tuple name, which was matrix, then followed by the index. I want the second tuple. So the second tuple is index 1. That is index 1. Remember, this is index 0 and this is index 1. There are only two tuples in that case. So the first tuple would be index 0 and the second tuple would be index 1. That is why we are having 1 here. And then for that specific tuple, once I have accessed that specific tuple, I now look for the first value. And the first value, which is 3, is index 0. That is index 0. So this tells you extract the first value from the second tuple. And once I print out that, what we get is 3. What we get is 3. And you can see that is what we are getting, 3. We can also do the same. We can use what we call a for loop. We can use a for loop. So for this one, our matrix is 1, 2, and then 3, 4. It contains 2 tuples, or even nested tuples. So for row in matrix, for each row in matrix, remember for row, this one can be changed. We are looping through each inner tuple. For row in matrix, this is now the row in matrix. And then we now proceed to each item. For each item in the row, remember we only have 2 rows. We have this row and this row. So for each item in the row, print the item. Print the item. And what you get is 1, 2, 3, 4. So we are looping through a nested tuple. We are looping through a nested tuple. So for each row in the matrix, for each row within the matrix, or even within the matrix tuple, that gives us 2 rows, this row and this row. And then we'll be having 2 rows, this row and this row. And then for each item in the row, so now we are interested in each item in the row, which is 1, 2, and 3, 4. Print out the item. And Python is going to print out all the items. That is how we loop through a nested tuple. And then the last part is on tuples as dictionary keys. We can actually use tuples as dictionary keys. So for example, assume we have our tuple, which is locations. And in this case, we have to use the curly brackets to mean that it's a dictionary. And then we have our tuple within our dictionary. So this is a tuple. This is the key, and then this is the value. This is the key. 1, 2, that is our tuple, and this is the value. And then this is also the key, and this is the value. Remember, a dictionary must have what we call keys and values. Keys and values. So we are printing the value for key 1 and then 2. For key 1, 2. So we want to print the value for key 1, 2 from our locations tuple. From our locations dictionary. This is our locations dictionary. So what we are going to do is that we are interested in the first key. Which is this. That is our first key. And then we print out this value, which is now Nairobi. And once we run that, what we are going to get is Nairobi. It's Nairobi. Now, if I change this to 2, if I change that to 2, you can see that we are getting a key error. In this case, we are getting a key error. we are getting a key error because in this case, we do not have this. Okay. If I also change that to 1, 1, you can also see that we are also getting a key error. We are also getting a key error. So I can have this. I can have 1, 2, 1, 2 in that case, and that is going to give me the value for key 1, the value for key 1, and its subsequent value in that case, which is Nairobi. Okay. So this is a summary of a list compared to tuples. So I have a summary. This actually summarizes everything. So for tuples, we've said that they are immutable, they are ordered items, collections of items. Then for lists, they are usually mutable and ordered. And then a list uses square brackets, a tuple uses parentheses. And then a list can be changed, a tuple cannot be changed. Then a list has a slower performance, while a tuple has a faster performance. In terms of memory usage, a list uses more memory, while a tuple uses less memory. Then we have built-in functions that we discussed about. For example, a list, we can be able to append, remove, pop, and even use the sort functions. But for a tuple, we can only use the count and the index to get the count of the number of times a specific item is appearing within a tuple, and even the index. And then for both of the two, that is list and tuples, they support indexing, they also support slicing, and they also allow duplicates, and they also support the use of nested structures. So we can nest a list, we can also use a nested tuple. So this is an example of the assignment, how to deal with each one of them. So for tuples, we use parentheses, for list, we use square brackets. Now, we also said that anytime you try modifying a tuple, it will return an error. But if you try modifying a tuple, it will not return an error. Okay, then packing within a list is usually less common. But packing and unpacking within a tuple is usually very, very common. We can unpack values within a tuple. Unpacking is supported. It is usually supported within a list and also a tuple. And then for tuples, we can use dictionary keys. We can use dictionary keys, just like what we did earlier on. But for a list does not use dictionary keys. And then when do we use them? The typical user cases, a list is majorly uses dynamic data, or even whereby you need frequent updates, while a tuple uses fixed data, that is now frozen data, whereby there is a high level of safety, like for example, when you're dealing with coordinate data. And that is it. So that is a summary on the different features about a tuple and also a list. So next on, we are going to be discussing about sets. We are going to be majorly discussing about sets. And then we're also going to be discussing about dictionaries. So that is the end of our session today. I believe you learned as much, and I also believe that you are also able to follow along. So goodbye, and we meet during our next session.